So now you should be able to see my screen, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so let me start again. So, yeah, I work for quite a while on this topic, and today I just want to give you an overview of the work I do, which is for more than 20 years now centered around technology, of course, interaction design, and user experience, positive experience, and I would rather say well-being. But let me just go back a little bit. So I started with human-computer interaction like more than 20 years ago. And, you know, we had interesting problems back then. So, for example, we had heated discussions in ergonomics of whether a mouse should have 3 buttons or 2 buttons or only 1. This, of course, has changed tremendously. So today, we're not talking about that so much more, maybe still, but we have problems like this, a full body interaction in virtual worlds, gestures, a lot of new types of interactions we have to design. Also from a screen perspective, it was always very limited, our view. So these are the typical problems I studied about when I was a student in the 90s, you know, color schemes and how not to combine them. And if we became very adventurous, we combined that with font sizes and wrote design principles about that. So this also has changed. We have a lot of graphical visual design now, which is much more about much more than just perception. It's also about aesthetics and beauty. And all this is, of course, also reflected in the concepts that are used in usability studies, human-computer interaction, ergonomics, and user experience. And let me just do a little bit of a time travel with my bookshelf, with the help of my bookshelf. I just put out some of my favorite books, and just to give you like a personal story. So this was one of the books I cherished a lot when I was a student in psychology, Human Error. And of course, it takes a perspective where technology has to be designed in a way so that people don't have that many problems and don't make that many errors. You might know this book, The User-Centered System Design, also a very cognitive perspective on how to design systems so that people can understand them, perceive them correctly. Coming out from this, something like usability engineering, the idea that we can engineer this type of quality by careful planning and principles and evaluation and maybe even automatic systems. While this happened, also a different strand of work emerged. This is a very nice book. If you haven't seen it before, you should try to get one, The Art of Human-Computer Interface Design, which takes a more designerly stance and also focuses on stuff like aesthetics, for example. At the beginning of the 2000s, Patrick Jordan, a designer at Philips, wrote this book about design and pleasurable products. He called it The New Human Factors. Colleagues and I took that up in our phonology approach, where we also said we need a research and science of enjoyment in HCI. And of course, let me do a little bit of advertising. I also wrote in 2010 a book, Experience Design, which actually turns it around and argues that technology is not so much the problem, that we should rather care and think about the experiences which are created through this. So this was a little travel, and of course this was 10 years ago, and things further evolved, and I'd like to show you some examples. My theory of user experience design at the moment, which is actually a design for well-being a little bit, and some projects, and I also want to discuss some new developments with you. So let me start with this. All the conceptual approaches that I showed you have the master narrative of serving humans. So we always want to do good for humans. But if we look at technology, you all know that we often fail. This is a classic example, I'd say. We have the smartphone, a technology that actually is meant to connect, but in many situations it alienates. So there's quite an interesting study where they went to a cafe, and when a group entered, half of the people were asked to put their phones away, and the other half of the groups were asked to put their telephone on the table. And then many different things were measured. And what happened is that the group with the phone on the table, in general, felt more distracted, and this led to less enjoyment and interest, actually more boredom, and feelings of being less socially connected. So the experience you have from a visit with a group in a cafe is mediated and transformed by this technology, and not necessarily in a positive way. Now we can, of course, start to fix this problem. Many of my students, I've been in industrial design for quite a while, so we have a lot of tangible things, but many of my students were very interested in creating solutions to the problem of the mobile phone at the table. Yeah, for example, stuff like this, with little bags, so that you don't have them on the table, but you have them nearby. But I believe, or my idea is that it would better if we make well-being an explicit goal of design, and also, rethink the current way technology is designed a little bit, instead of dealing with the problems later when they emerge. So we need to grasp the elusive concept of well-being and make it productive for design, and that's what I want to do in a nutshell. I mean, many of you have maybe a psychology background, so I'm sure that you can read up, or when you're more interested in it, you can read up on the exact psychology of it. So let's start from what we actually want to achieve, well-being. So there are many definitions of well-being. This is one that is quite often used also in the economics, where well-being is the frequent experience of positive moments, the infrequent experience of negative moments, and a general satisfaction with life. And let me just highlight that this has two components. One is more immediate situated or hot affective, and that's the experience part. So we could argue that well-being is, to a good extent, the consequence of accumulating positive everyday experiences. And that also means that what we do in life actually contributes our well-being. So there are many reasons why we differ in our ability to be happy. But of course, what we do and how we do it has a good part in it. And we have, in this respect, a choice. We can decide how to do things, and then get from the same activity maybe more or less happiness. When do we gather this happiness? So there are not that many theories in psychology about that. Most of them are goal theories, and they argue that we experience something as enjoyable and meaningful when these activities fulfill psychological needs. So we work a lot with self-determination theory, Ryan Dickey, and you might know they have the needs, autonomy, relatedness, and competence, for example. But we will see that in a second.
Macht Parken Spaß?
So, sorry for that. So let me just show you that in action. Yeah, we have a lot of projects with car companies as well, and we had a project about parking. And now let me show you just a little video where somebody tells a story about why he enjoys parking. I know it's in German, but I hope you get the subtitles.
Macht Parken Spaß?
Mir macht Parken Spaß, ja.
Was macht dir denn am Parken Spaß?
Weil es so wie so ein Geschicklichkeitsspiel ist. Es hat sowas mit räumlichem Denken, Orientierung, Schwung, keine Ahnung, es ist wie so eine kleine Minisportart, so, für mich. Wie so ein Geschicklichkeitsspiel tatsächlich. Das ist irgendwas an, was man sich auch so mit dem man sich so messen kann.
So this guy is telling a positive story about parking. I hope you got the gist. So he says it's like a little game and a challenge and so on. And it's quite obvious what kind of need is fulfilled through this. It's, of course, a need for competence. So people in general have the wish to be good in what they do. And this actually motivates this kind of positive experience. Yeah? Of course, not all of us enjoy parking. That's not the point here. But when we enjoy something and when we find it meaningful, then there is most likely a need connected to that. So in my work group, we work with an extended set of needs. So we have competence, we have autonomy, popularity, relatedness, security, stimulation, physicality. I don't want to go them into detail, in detail, but just take them as like a collection of sources where enjoyment can come from, which are quite different. Just let me point out one thing. So when you take an experience-oriented perspective, a need-based, then a need like competence, for example, is quite important. And it already shows that making stuff as easy as possible is maybe not the right way to do it. Of course, we don't get enjoyment by making things unnecessarily difficult. By, for example, I would say misunderstanding usability as something that also means to make every task as simple as possible. We would, for example, lose competence out of sight. So we have these needs. They are universal. We do things. I call them practices and how to fulfill them. And these are very diverse. And one important thing here is not all psychology, but things are always involved. So whatever technology you use, it will inevitably and subtly shape the way you do stuff, what you do, and how you do it. And I subscribe to a strand of philosophy of technology that actually don't separate humans and technology that much, but understands them as constituting each other, as an interaction, as a relationship, and not an interaction. So we cannot live without technology, and technology is the way it is and shapes us in many ways.
Und jetzt?
Was machst du?
Parkt er selber ein. Man muss aber, glaube ich, noch bremsen.
Und wie fühlt sich das jetzt an?
Voll gruselig.
Wenn du jetzt an dieses, was du vorher gesagt hast, was du schön findest am Parken, was hat das davon?
Nicht im Ansatz so befriedigend. Es ist irgendwie beeindruckend, dass er das hinkriegt, ne? Also, dass er jetzt auch wahrscheinlich ziemlich gut am Rand und so, der parkt halt perfekt ein, ne? Muss man ihm schon lassen.
Ja, ich sehe nicht mal den.
So, und, aber irgendwie ist es nicht so eine große Befriedigung, wie wenn ich jetzt selber eingeparkt hätte. Ich parke halt einfach.
Ja, wer hat denn jetzt hier gerade gut geparkt?
Das Auto, das System hat gut geparkt. Ja, ich habe damit nichts zu tun. In dem Fall.
So what happened is, you take the same car, you take the same person, you add a new technology here, an automatic parking support system, and what happens is that the actual experience is gone. He says that is none of my doing. I haven't done it. The system did it. It does it even better than me. So through this technology, the parking might have become more convenient, but from an experience perspective, it went away. And that already shows the power of design in that context, to shape the experiences and how careful we need to be with this kind of technologies. So I summarize all this in a model like this. So we have well-being experience and needs, maybe the meaning on the upper part. That's why we do things. We then do things like, for example, parking, having breakfast, meeting friends, go out for a run, working, and so on. And we use things for that and interact with that. That's the material side. And what we actually do in experience design is to link these two together. We work on one side on the meaning. So on the concept side, what could be imagining reasonable and critically reflected moments of meaning and enjoyment? And on the other side, we need to talk about how interaction, concrete interaction with technology expresses and supports this meaning. And in the following, I want to just show you some examples for both categories. I deliberately picked some examples more removed maybe from normal user interfaces, just to show you how general this concept of interaction is. So let me start with tidiness. So I don't know whether you know Marie Kondo. Marie Kondo is a decluttering expert. She has even a show on Netflix where she helps people to get rid of stuff and to tidy up. And she has a particular method which is very simple. So the idea is that you take everything you have and then you take it in your hand, and when it sparks joy, that's how she expresses it, then you keep it. And if it doesn't spark joy, then you put it away. So that's her method. And actually, we do studies about tidiness for quite a while, and we found something similar. I don't know whether you know this phenomenon. I guess you have it too. We call it here the nest. So the nest is a pile of stuff that accumulates somewhere in a flat. So you put your stuff onto it, and it becomes this heap. And the problem with it is it is not very positive to have it around. So you want to have it go away, but you can't just remove it. You can't just put it all in a trash bin because there might be and there will be important things in it, memorable stuff, and so on. So these things, they pile up in flats, and if you live with other people there, they become a real nuisance. So we saw this phenomenon, and now instead of only describing the problem, our method is to talk with people that can cope with it and actually are positive towards their nests because they found ways to handle them. And a typical method we found is people said, I just take one piece when I feel like it, and then I either discard it, throw it away, or I put it to use and put it away in an insensible way. This is a practice, and you can now recommend this to people. That's the way to deal with it. But what we did is we actually built a sideboard that embodies this idea. So you see this sideboard at the moment. There will be the pile will be on top of it. And now, of course, you can get rid of it by putting it through this hole and put it into the drawer. But the drawer is designed in a way that whenever you open it, something will fall out at the bottom. So you have to take it up. And this maybe will be the part you go with to the right side. And there you have two functions. On the upper side, you have something like putting something on display because it's an important thing for you. And then or down is a garbage can where you can trash can where you can put it in, and it even makes it a little bit more difficult for you to get it out. So what this is, of course, this is a very strange type of furniture. But what it actually is the sideboard embodies a positive practice. So there is a way of dealing with stuff so that it is that you feel happy about it. And instead of telling it people, we put it into the sideboard. It's like a suggestion how to deal with clutter in material. And the idea, of course, is that when you have it, it will quite naturally play out, and you will adopt the practice without much talking about it. Let me give you another example, mindfulness in traffic. I don't know exactly how it, for example, looks in Italy, but in Germany, we have this shared spaces here. And it's supposedly a shared space, and the cars only have to go like 7 kilometers, so a walking speed. But of course, it never works out. So the cars go through there with 30 kilometers, and people don't use it as really as a shared space. And we came up with a concept for that, and I'm going to show that to you in a minute. So we did this for BMW, and they hadn't been really thrilled. But let me say this, yeah, stepping out of the car and actually guiding it through shared space is a perfect concept in terms of well-being and in terms of the effect. It guarantees walking speed. It allows for direct driver-pedestrian interaction. You saw that maybe in the enactment, so people start to talk with you, although you're the driver of the car. It is healthy. It brings you back in touch with the environment and nature. And it is a perfect application for an autonomous car. And if you want to live in a livable city, then this is very important. This is an offering of a new practice, I would say, with many aspects of well-being. And I like this as an example because you already sense that it might be not so easy to establish new ways of, particular ways of designing for well-being. Because of course, many people find this kind of concept strange. When I present it, many people have a lot of reasons why they can't do that. You know, maybe it rains, maybe they have the wrong shoes or whatsoever. So there's plenty of ideas why it doesn't work. But of course, that's not true. If we would have that, we could use it. And the way we would experience cities would totally change. These are just two examples of concepts. For the meaning, you can imagine there are many, many more. We've done research and concepts for shared music, for also in the work domain for radiologists. So there are plenty of concepts that kind of follow this logic. And then, of course, I said there's this other part, the interaction. So we need also to express and support the intended meaning. And let me just first show you something to highlight that point. So as interaction designers, we can create all kinds of interactions with a thing. So there is no natural reason why we have to switch on a lamp anymore, especially not in computer times. So we can design these interactions, and each interaction will create its particular meaning. So although at the end of the day the lamp is lit, it will make, that's at least the idea, it will make a difference whether you put it on with a lighter as if it was a candle. Maybe the feelings are more romantic, maybe it's more special through this. But the idea is that there will be a creation of meaning inevitably, whether you want or not, through the way you design the interaction, besides usability issues. So let me give you two examples of that. So I did some research on keeping secrets, because secrets is an interesting practice of autonomy, especially for teenagers, but also for normal people. So we all keep small secrets as a way to, to be with ourselves, I'd say. And from the example you already see, which is a little diary, you see that often these interactions with this have a certain quality. So you have a lock and is a bit special and secretive. And we asked people how they ideally interact secrets, so how they consume secrets. And from a number of interviews, we found some very clear principles. Whenever you interact with a secret, it feels the best, most secretive. When you do it slow and mindfully, when you can fast hide it, and tangibility, touching the secret, if possible, is very important. So from this, we designed a little concept for the office. So imagine you have a digital picture frame in the office, and this picture frame has a secret picture in it, so that in a moment nobody observes you. You can, in a way, have a moment for yourself and treat this as a little secret. And we designed a video prototype for that. One prototype was with a standard usable interaction with the button. I don't show that. But the other interaction I'm going to show now was designed on the principles we found about an interaction that feels secretive. Let me show it, how it looks like. So now you should be able to see the picture frame. And now you can touch it. and see the picture underneath it, also touch the things in the picture, and you can quickly let it disappear. We did a study with that, a video vignette study, and asked people about their experiences, and I'm not going to the results in detail, but secretive is more positive compared to the control group, and especially because people feel more autonomous. So the way the interaction, it's not the concept, because the concept is the same in both cases, but the way the interaction was presented let people imagine that it would feel more experiential in the direction of the need we wanted to achieve. So this interaction design intensifies and expresses the experience and plays a traceable role. And we can understand this aesthetic of interaction, how I would call it, as a fit between the how the interaction is designed, and the why, what kind of needs and experiences we want to create. And to highlight that, let me show you just another concept or thing we did. This is a hearing aid with a brain-computer interface. I don't want to go into detail how it works, but let's say it needs an interaction at a certain point, which helps people to direct the listening of the device to certain people or to certain places in the room. And we started to design a free-form interaction, gesture-based interaction for that. I just show you one example. Just one example. It's not about the usability now of these gestures, but more about the effects of using something like this in a conversation. So we did a study where we asked people into the laboratory and for something completely different and had a conversation. Left is the participant, right, the guy in the black pullover is the interviewer, and he supposedly wears this hearing aid, but this has nothing to do with the actual conversation. And while this conversation happens, two times, some very brief things happen, which actually in the real world would require the person, the interviewer, to interact with this hearing aid. And we designed two different interactions for that. One is secretive and the other expressive. And also there was a control group. Let me just show you one instance of the secretive interaction here. So they're talking, then something happens. He needs to adjust his hearing aid. She doesn't know what he's doing actually, because they didn't talk about that, and they just go on having the conversation. And this happens twice within 10 minutes. In the other group, so here secretive, concealed, no obvious relation to the hearing aid. In the other group, it was more expressive. Let me show you that. Same situation. So open, some relation to hearing aid, also not really understandable from the outside. And you also see that they didn't stop, she didn't hesitate, they didn't talk about that. At the end, we had a lot of different questionnaires about the conversation as in itself, about how the participants felt while the conversation, how the confederate, so the interviewer, was perceived. And what turned out is that that in the secretive interaction, the conversation was experienced as less pleasant and independent of the content of the conversation. So we controlled for that. Participants felt more negative during the conversation, especially nervous. And the confederate was perceived as less agreeable. We used the Neo-PIR for that. So a question that measures the big five. So the confederate was perceived as less friendly, cooperative, and empathic. And that was only happening for the secretive interaction, not for the control and not for the expressive. So this time during 10 minutes, this doing something concealed in a conversation had traceable effects on the conversation, on the perception of the person, And we also measured perceptions of the hearing aid at the end, also on the hearing aid. So what you can see from that is that in this logic of aesthetics of interaction, there is no one good interaction. So there is an interaction that is secretive, but it must be in line with the need. In a conversation, you want to feel related. All kind of secretiveness implies autonomy and is thus at odds with the goal. And that also means if you go to back to usability, there are not that many principles that actually hold for everything. So, for example, efficiency might be very important in many cases. But for example, if you want to create moments of relatedness for long distance couples, for example, efficiency is not at all an important attribute. It's much more about slowness and tangibility, for example. So we have these two things, concept and interaction, and I hope that I showed you that experience design happens on both, on concepts, on meaning, and on material and the link to that. And let me just take another time to have an outlook, a future challenge I'm working on it, what I would call post-experiential technologies. So I hear sounds, but I can't read anything. So if I have to stop, Andrea, you have to tell me. So I go back to the mouse. Yeah, I hurry. Let's go back to the mouse. So the mouse is still a device very much used, and there is a whole idea of interaction behind it. And I hope, and I guess you are aware of that. It started with software like this, VisiCalc, and it's basically about the principle of direct manipulation that Ben Schneiderman developed in the 80s and is still the most basic notion and idea of how we interact in a usable way with systems. So continuous representation of the object, physical actions or labeled buttons instead of syntax, reversible operations. This is the core of any Windows icon menus pointer interaction we have at the moment. For Schneiderman, the car was the perfect example of direct manipulation. And of course, when you drive a car, you have this feeling of being in the car and that the car becomes a part of your body. I will revisit it a little later. This, of course, went on. This is from the end of 90s, so we have tangible computing, we have gesture-based touchscreens, and so on. And these are all principles that actually further intensify the idea of direct manipulation. So this is our ideal, and I guess you will operate under the same ideal that technology is always ready at hand. People are at the center of action. They use this everywhere. That kind of extends their minds and bodies. And we have the ideal of embodied interaction. And that's also the core of experience design. Now we have, from a technology philosophical perspective, if I use ID, then we call this an embodiment relationship. So technology as extension of the self. Now we have a problem because we have more and more technologies that are not at all direct manipulation. Either accidentally or deliberately designed. So if you use a voice assistant, like Alexa or so, it's meant as a voice interface, but in fact, it will create the idea of a counterpart. That you are talking with something that has a, for example, female voice. If you use robots like the Pepper, they are deliberately designed to create a counterpart. And if you use apps like Replica, which is AI app to have therapeutical chats, then of course this also creates another person. So we have this software technologies now, even more than before, that totally work differently because they create a completely different relationship, what ID calls alternative relationship. Now technology becomes other. I call this otherware. So on the right, you see, which I just published in Interactions, a very small paper about that and the problems of that. Because when you now have otherware, this otherware implies social interactions. So now the metaphors are to converse, to cooperate, to delegate, to command, to trust. And HCI in general is deeply wary of that. So already Schneiderman called it the Humpty Dumpty syndrome, when people try to personify systems and design that as a social interaction. And we have spectacular failures, like, I don't know whether you remember this, like Clippy, for example, Karl Klammer in German, which is an embodied agent, which actually was switched off because it was so ambivalent, the idea about it and the responses. On the other hand, forming an authority relationship may be unavoidable. So when systems become proactive, when they learn, when they become a park because they're so complex, when they're not predictable anymore, quite naturally and automatically, the system, the technology is not an extension of myself anymore. It's not a hammer that I have under a perfect control, but it becomes an other which I have to kind of converse with. And this relationship also may be helpful. Robots can be used for combating loneliness. Self-disclosure is facilitated with machines, and behavior change may also work better if we design technology as other. But we have also problems, because especially for me, the authority relationship challenged the concept of experience design and design for well-being, because the key of what I showed you in the beginning is that we have agency as humans. We need to feel, to act through a technology to attribute the positive outcome to us. If things just happen without us, then we will not have the meaning and the positive experience. And I can show you this here. It doesn't matter how this data exactly happened, but we asked people about how satisfied they are with their work in 3 different scenarios. And the outcome in each scenario was the same, but in the first column, they did it alone. In the second column, they had weak AI support. And in the third column, they had a strong AI support. But in all 3 cases, the outcome was always positive or negative and always the same. But you see, especially in the blue line, how satisfaction is reduced. The same outcome, but since I was not really doing it alone, this technology appeared as a counterpart, which I don't really be responsible for, satisfaction disappeared from the activity. And the same with meaning. And this, of course, is a problem for experience design. So a really big question for me is how to design this interaction with otherware. What types of cooperation do we really want to have? What type of concepts and what type of interactions? And just to close with a critique on the predominant paradigm and an example. So normally what is done is we use anthropomorphism or zoomorphism. So these systems, they have human voices, they look like little animals or little children or a cartoon character that is a living entity. But this is deeply problematic because it embeds, it triggers social scripts like stereotypes and roles, and there's research about that. That it makes a difference whether an agent, a voice interface talks in a gendered voice or not. It can easily become uncanny. It feels fabricated. It is a fake sociability. A machine is not sociable. There are many kinds of unwanted transfers between interaction with a machine and with people in both directions. Yes, it simplifies the interaction, but it also narrows the form of social relationships. So you either accept it or not. And it diffuses human agencies. And I believe we should rather think of these things as a third species. And to give you a not very good example of a thing we were involved in, this is a companion robot for at home. And you see it's like a mixture of a living being with a strange alien head and a single eye and something like ears that can be moved. At the same time, it's a piece of furniture and a shelf. It's a very hybrid figure. And in one study, for example, we compared that with Pepper, how people respond to that. And for example, Pepper, almost everybody gave it a human name. For this machine, only a little bit about half. For Pepper, always people assigned a gender. For this machine, only half-half. For pepper, everybody thought that it's a being. For this machine, half found it a being, the other half a commodity. So what happens is you open a corridor, a wider corridor of through ambiguity, how to treat this machine. And we used it also in the field. You can see two pictures here. And actually, when people use it at home, you also see a broader spectrum of social behavior here. So because some people adopt it as a real counterpart, as an anthropomorphize it, giving it names and so on. And others, for example, especially the males, treat it more like a machine, a little bit halfway between a living being and a commodity. And this, for me, is already a success and a road, an important step, and one idea how to make otherware into something that is sensible and usefully designed for us in the future. Here are other examples of robots you could think of. So let me summarize. So I hope that I conveyed that all technology inevitably shapes our well-being through the functionality and interaction provided. All technologies tell story. It doesn't matter whether you want that or not. And as designers, of course, it's much better to take control about that and to do it explicitly. To my mind, well-being should be the starting point of all design. So it's not the technology that is somehow asking for being sensibly used, but we should primarily think about what will make our lives better and think more about different variants of that. So I think we need more value fiction and less science fiction, more social innovation and less purely technical innovation. So we need to think about ways of living together, for example, in the future, and not so much about video conferencing. The challenge of designing for well-being is to identify, understand, rewrite, and invent positive everyday practices, materialize them through interaction and form, and that's a humanistic approach to technology design, which I hope you will also take, and I'm sure you will also take in your program because it's the gist of user experience. And then finally, otherware is a problem for experience design. We have to be very careful with it. We don't have that many knowledge about it. And actually, from an HCI perspective, designing a thing as other is not very wanted in that sense. And the solution to that is, I am positive towards it, but I think we need to design it as discernible from living beings. And it should not primarily mimic existing social interaction, but offer a new set of possibilities to interact and conceptually live with it in that sense. So thank you very much. And I am open to question and stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Marc, for the wonderful journey that you allowed us in this beautiful reflection on interaction design, experience, and meaning. So I would like to have the honor to start the question sessions, and after I would like to also hear the questions of our students that I see already started to share some questions, some thoughts. So you talked about the relationship between design and meaning. So the world is inherently meaningful for us. We perceive the world in terms of affordance, in terms of what we can do with the objects of the world with it. And by physically interacting with the world, we access this meaning and also express this meaning. So interaction creates meaning. Does not only hold for users during interaction, but also for designers, according to what you said, when generating ideas and developing these concepts. However, meaning created by the user is opaque, is not transparent to the designer when creating the design. So how can the designer infer the meaning making of the user?
Yeah, that's of course a very difficult question, but let me simplify it a little bit. So, when you think of activities in itself, so of course there is this idea of appropriation. So we as designers never exactly know how technology is used, and humans are very inventive in finding new uses for technology that hadn't been thought of by the designers. And that will happen. That will also happen with meaning. My point is that there's also a process I would call inscribing. So at a certain point, the designer has to formulate to themselves and to others what they want the users to do with it, and what kind of meaning they want to create. So this is an important process, and I think the first thing I want to point out is that designers start to do that, because sometimes in usability programs, it's more like, okay, I go to the users, I ask them what they want, and then I do this. But my idea of the approach would rather model it as a conversation. So the designer has values, the user has values, and it's a conversation about these values. And I think through this, and then through empirical methods. So somebody's very loud and has the microphone open. That's a bit of a problem.
Please shut the microphone if you're not intervening. Thank you.
So now it's getting better. Okay. So with the empirical methods we know, we can start to explore this meaning that is created on the other side and mismatches between that. But of course, yeah, you can't look into people's heads. It's a matter of reasoning and a matter of research, in that sense. Does that help?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I know it's very challenging, but I also do think that conversation is the key to access this opaque world of meaning, and with a convergence of methods, there is a way of addressing this challenge and this issue. So now I would like to start with the questions from the audience, from students. Fabrizio, if you are listening us, in what sense did you use the word aesthetic in the specific context?
Yeah, so aesthetic in this context has two functions. It means that there is a concept that expresses also emotional aspects of it, also perceptual aspects that goes beyond a single or simple notion of, for example, efficiency. So in that sense, if you design, for example, systems only under the idea of efficiency, efficiency becomes your chosen aesthetics of interaction. But this can be broader. So I know there are different meanings of aesthetics. If you go into the classical, it would be rather only more strictly like refer to the senses in that sense. So yeah, interaction is sensed. It's a thing that is not only cognitively used, but also through all our senses. At the same time, in my reading, it instills an idea of beauty. So that interaction is not only supposed to be efficient alone, but there can be other aspects that make beautiful. Fabrizio, does that help? He's not
Fabrizio. Not sure if, like what aspect, for example, Fabrizio, you can also use the vocal chat if you would like.
Yeah,
anyway.
just to give you an example, let's say speed. So we can talk a lot about how interaction needs to be fast. So if you have if you take the isonorm, then efficiency is very important, and efficiency is the time you spend to get into to fulfill a task. So now imagine you design an interaction between long distance couples. There you want to extend time. You don't want to be efficient. You want that that it would be the opposite of what you actually want. Imagine you would design that under an efficiency thing, so everybody would really feel really negative about it. Yeah. So because using time can mean investment. It can mean caring. It can mean, being mindful in that sense. And that's the idea I think about it. So we, for example, have like a little question, like a vocabulary, which has words that are not positive and negative, but just describes different types of interactions, slow versus fast, for example. And we find that in many different contexts, you can have quite different profiles that actually match. And when they match, then this interaction is perceived as more positive and more beautiful in that sense, in an experiential sense, than when it doesn't match. And that's the idea.
Great. Fabrizio, are you satisfied with the explanation?
You mean pleasant by beautiful, right?
Pleasant is also a very, there's a good reason why I so insist on calling it enjoyable and meaningful, because you might know that in well-being there are basically two different concepts, hedonic and eudaimonic. The one is more towards pleasantness in experiences, is the hedonic, and that's what I capture under enjoyable. The other is more long-term related to goals. Competence is often eudaimonic because actually it's not always fun to study, for example, but in the long term you will feel very good when you have your grades and so on. So there is no immediate pleasure, and I call these experiences more, I call them meaningful. And in this interaction aesthetics, of course, both plays a role. That's why I have a little bit problems with just saying it's about pleasantness. It's also about meaning and about positiveness in the widest sense. Okay?
Okay, great. There is time for two more questions from students. Belal is asking, there is a way to build a social interaction that actually is pleasant and acceptable, or do our biases and our variables limiting us? And how does the other where argument explain the enormous success of Alexa, for example?
Yeah, I start with the first part. I think we have to work on that. And of course, at the moment, it's just primarily a conceptual argument. But let me just give you this example of gendered voice assistants. At the moment, I don't know, Amazon do their studies and they find that people prefer female voices. But there is research already dating back from 20 years that this also brings up stereotypes because you actually tend to command Alexa, which you then means that you find it might more preferable to command around females than you would command around males. So even if you like it, society needs to think about whether this is, and especially the women in society needs to think about whether this is what they want. That's why you need to solve this problem by gender neutral voices. And that's already available. So there are companies that work on these voices that are hard to gender. And it could be that in the future, we can come to the conclusion that a good design for a voice assistant can only be a neutral gendered voice, because we went through that argument. So, and the same way I explore ambiguity, hybridity. We, for example, do a project on social AI companions in the car. So that you can have conversations in the car when you ride alone. And one principle we use there, for example, is that it should be possible to have conversations with this technology which actually differ from human conversations by focusing on the things the technology can do well. So, for example, an AI has a very good memory. So you could have conversations with this thing, and it could quote you verbatim from things you said 10 years ago. And this allows for conversations which are quite different to conversations you would have with humans. And instead of trying to make it as human-like as possible, we should kind of explore the superpowers of technologies in this social contexts so that we have fulfilling and interesting social contact with machines, which doesn't, is in conflict with human interaction. To your second part, I doubt that it's really that enormously successful. It's always a little bit problematic with this kind of systems. Of course, they're there, they're adopted. We never know really how they are used somewhere. And we also don't know much about the negative outcomes of that. But this kind of research is coming. So many people study now voice assistants. And the promise, this idea of, yeah, now I can hands-free interact, isn't that nice? And these shallow scenarios that these companies, these big tech companies draw are dissolved and become much more complex when you really look into how people use that and what negative effects these things can have. And the only thing I say is, like, I think we should take a positive stance to that as designers, as HCI people, and, you know, find our own ideas how to do that properly, because we will see this mountain of problems that comes when this technology becomes more and more distributed.
Great, thank you. And I asked Belal if he's satisfied with the question, if he can listen us. Okay. Last question from Francesca. In your book, Experience Design, you talk about social value related to the beauty of a product. Does this social comparison applies to the interaction as well?
That's a very good question. So first, let me say, okay, the book is 10 years old. I did this research on
still actual. She's still actual.
I know. But I did this research on beauty, and of course, especially in this research of beauty, this social value was more or less the idea that, of course, I think that the beauty of things can rub off to me because things are like my extended self. I'm not focusing on that much anymore, but it's very easy for me to take that to the in a little twist to the aesthetics of interaction, because actually I have a research project at that moment which cares or studies interaction from the observer perspective, especially. So asking the question not primarily how people feel when they interact with it, but what other people think about somebody when they use this kind of interaction. In the same way, you'll be observed using the latest iPhone, which has some social value maybe. You will also be observed when you do gesture-based interaction somewhere, or when you just, hold the phone in a certain type of way. And this is also implications for observers. And I think in interaction design and in usability, this is a perspective which is really, which is not acknowledged and went unnoticed for quite a long while. Also, in the world of visual design, it's very clear that this happens. So yeah, totally positively said. Maybe the same things apply. They are a little bit different, and we need research to get a good idea of how being observed with interaction, what that does to me, and what it means to others when they see me doing certain things and trying to explain that to themselves.
Hey, thank you very much, Marc. I think
welcome.
If we can do a virtual applause, that's my applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful speech. So now it's the turn of